So right from your very early years, you knew him closely?
Yes, we did. You know, it was a family where my mother and father were deeply in love with each other, and that gave the kind of light to the whole family life.
Did he take an enormous interest in your education, then? Did he have any particular ideas about it?
Yes, he had. I mentioned at the beginning of our talk together that he was an internationalist. And for that reason, I did not follow my elder brother to Eton. I went to a tutor's, rather famous tutor's, doesn't exist any longer, where they would only take 4 English students. All the rest of them were French and German and Italian. And as a result, I had the corners rubbed off me, because at that stage I felt England and a lot of inferior races made up the world. See? But I learned differently. And the result is now that I have old school fellows who are friends of mine all over Europe, different nationalities.
Would you say that you'd adopted his code of morals and manners?
No, it was never a question of morals. It was never a question of morals. It was a question of a certain code of living. It's a different thing. He understood the word honor to the fullest sense of the word. His sense of honor was that of a medieval knight. I don't say mine is. I come padding along behind as a rather unworthy squire, but I try my best.
There are very many Sherlock Holmes societies throughout the world. It's a most incredible literary cult. What do you think of them?
Well, I'm glad you used the word literary cult, because sometimes I imagine it's a religious cult, the way some of these people behave. The rank and file are perfectly genuine students and scholars of Holmes. Normal, sane people who love the books for what they are. Unfortunately, there is another, much smaller strata, which really does comes almost into the abnormal, where you have the most extraordinary labored works to prove that Watson was a lesbian, or that Holmes was in fact a Moriarty, and things of that type, which are extremely offensive, very offensive, because my father was a very pure writer in his thinking. He never made any great mystère about the psychological approach of Watson to Holmes and nonsense of that kind. They were 2 perfectly honest men working together.
I'm fascinated, as I know that many other people are, by your father's interest in spiritualism, which he investigated, as you were telling me earlier, for many years of his life. How much can you tell me about that?
Well, that's an enormous question, because you're asking me to give you a description of a man's investigation that covered, 35 years before he found his first proof, and which took him all over the world. And the last part of his life was devoted entirely to giving these lecture tours, because when it came to the end of the First World War, there was that tremendous question. We have lost millions of young men all over the world. What's happened to them? Are they only 2 buckets of salt in a bucket of water where it recomposes the body? Or is there a life beyond the grave? And the churches were totally incapable of giving a reply. Totally incapable. And my father and Sir Oliver Lodge and other men who had this knowledge considered it was incumbent upon them to do this at whatever risk. And many of these men sacrificed their scientific reputation and everything, absolutely martyred. Just as, without the physical, but mentally, in the same sense of the early Christian martyrs. They were simply ostracized.
Was your father treated like that?
No, he was not, because he wasn't dependent upon scientific societies and things like that. He could stand on his own feet and fight. And that's why some other men, whose names were also household words that they had to sacrifice more than he. Nevertheless, he sacrificed an enormous amount, including a fortune in money. And he spent the rest of his life going all over the world, lecturing all over the world, in all the great cities, telling people, yes, they are still alive, and it is possible to communicate, and it is possible to get absolute proof. We don't ask you to believe. You've got to get the knowledge for yourself so that you know it's true. Never believe until you've got the proof.
This was prompted by the First World War, was it?
The importance of the mission was prompted by that. The situation didn't exist till then. It was only a question, it was an epidemic question. But that World War, that frightful slaughter, changed the position of humanity. I mean, after all, this second war we've been through, apart from the Russian front, was nothing compared to the First World War, where the whole generation was virtually wiped out. And the churches had no answer to anything.
Did your father feel very much that religion, in fact, had failed everyone at that time?
Very much. And my father, I think, was supported with the majority of the world opinion. They could give no answer.
Now, the lecture tours that he went on were concerned with spiritualism entirely.
Yes, it's a word I hate.
What would you use?
Survivalism. It's a question of individual survival after death.
Did he offer the proof to the public?
Oh, yes, enormous amount of it. But he always said you can only get proof yourself, never through the lips of a third party. You've got to go out and look for it yourself, taking every precaution against fraud and folly. They exist. They exist in banking. They exist in law. They exist everywhere, fraud and folly, where the human element comes in, and also in the psychic. But of course, we're talking a great deal about the religious aspect. The other side of my father, which is even more interesting to me, was his incredible clear-mindedness in his services for England. And that's a thing that's been too often overlooked in articles about this extraordinary man. I don't think there's been any man who, between the period of 1895 and the end of the First World War, had a greater impact upon England and modern history of England at that time.
In what way?
His impact was felt behind every major crisis at that time. My father was moving behind the scenes. He worked very closely with Churchill and with many other of the outstanding public men. He was responsible for such diverse things as the introduction of the Court of Criminal Appeal into English law as a result of the Adalgi case. He was directly responsible for such things as the wound stripe. He made the first tests for the steel helmets for the Army, the Mae West life jackets for the Navy. All this came out of that tremendously talented mind, with its many facets, all working at full blast.
What do you think is his greatest achievement?
What a question. His greatest achievement. I think his greatest literary achievement was the White Company, and I think his greatest civic achievement was the result of the Adalgi case that brought in the Court of Criminal Appeal, because so many innocent people benefited through that.
Adrian Conan Doyle, thank you very much.